I just want to make this clear before I start off this alternate history scenario. I do not support Harris and the Democrats, nor Trump and the Republicans. They both suck ass. And because of that reason, I'm gonna try to keep this alternate history scenario as neutral and unbiased as possible. This video was supposed to come out on the 4th of July, but I was on vacation in San Diego for my birthday. Anyways, Trump, whether you like him or hate him, he's probably the most divisive and controversial president in modern American history. And due to Trump's divisiveness on American politics, there were multiple on top of multiple protests against Donald Trump. The largest and most infamous of these were the No Kings protests, a group of demonstrations that happened in June 2025, October 2025, and March 2026. Due to the No Kings protest being the largest anti-Trump protest and the largest single-day protest in American history, why didn't they cause a civil war? And more importantly, what if they did? For some context, ever since Trump announced he was running for president back in 2015, he has been involved in controversy after controversy, with many on the left comparing him to Hitler, while many people on the right compared him to Jesus Christ. Fast forward to January 2026 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, damn near 11 years later, ICE shot and killed 2 people, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, which caused widespread outrage throughout Minneapolis and the rest of the country. To add fuel to the burning fire, the Iran war, which happened in late February 2026, made Trump's popularity go down the fucking drain, which ultimately culminated in the March 2026 No Kings protest. So taking all of those facts into consideration, what if the March 2026 No Kings protest caused a second American Civil War? Well, that's the question we're going to explore today in this alternate history. Now, in order for the No Kings protest to remotely and realistically turn into a second civil war, we need the protesters to be a bit more riled up and a bit more violent than our own timeline. Whether it's Trump saying and or doing something that pisses them off, a few more casualties in the Iran war, and or a few thousand of these protesters waking up on a bad day, anything to get these protesters mad. This will cause many more people to show up and a lot more riots to happen in the streets. This will force the Trump administration to use a lot more force on these protesters compared to our own timeline, which will cause even more protesters to show up, which will cause even more riots in the streets, especially in blue cities like Minneapolis, New York, and Los Angeles. At first, state governors would use their national guards to de-escalate the riots, but the president has the authority to federalize those national guards, which basically means the governor loses control over their respective national guard. And if the riots get big enough and violent enough, and the Trump administration thinks that the state governors aren't doing shit to de-escalate the situation, I can see Donald Trump federalizing one of the state's national guards, which will cause even more protests and even more riots to happen all over the country. But due to growing anti-Trump sentiment all over the country, many state governors, especially those in blue states like California, New York, and Minnesota, would refuse to cooperate with Trump and or any national agencies like ICE, truly igniting the second American Civil War. Now, if you're enjoying my content so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Here's a list of videos that I plan on making in the near future, so if you want to see them, hit that subscribe button. Anyways, back to the scenario. Despite all these blue states seceding, the borders wouldn't be as clean as I make it seem. Many blue states, excluding Massachusetts, would have red enclaves, and many red states, excluding Oklahoma, would have blue enclaves. So the second American Civil War would more or less end up looking like this. Throughout the early months of the war, the Trump administration would have the upper hand because the secessionists are very disorganized and very decentralized, only having one common goal, and that is to end the alleged authoritarianism of the Trump administration. But in the long term, however, many blue states like California and New York hold the economic advantage because California has Silicon Valley while New York has Wall Street. Both reside in very liberal areas of those two states. Around a year later, in early to mid 2027, many international powers would start diplomatically aligning with either the secessionists or the federalists. Nations such as Canada, Mexico, the UK, France, and Germany would diplomatically support the secessionists, while others like China and especially Russia would diplomatically support the federalists. Why I say especially Russia is because Putin would likely try to convince Trump to leave NATO due to Trump's Western European allies allying with the secessionists instead of the legitimate US government. Now, the United States wouldn't immediately leave NATO because those in Eastern Europe would beg for the United States to stay in the alliance, as many Eastern European nations such as Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltics are very dependent on US aid against Russia. The most I see Trump doing during the Second American Civil War is leave NATO's military structure, similar to how France left NATO's military structure in the 1960s. They'll still officially be a part of the NATO alliance, but they wouldn't cooperate with them militarily anymore. This would cause Canada, the UK, Western Europe, and to a lesser extent Mexico increasing trade with the secessionists. Meanwhile, inside the remaining United States, many blue cities and red cities such as Austin, Texas, or Atlanta, Georgia will start their own little rebellions trying to break away from the Trump administration, but due to them not being a part of a blue state, they'll likely be crushed by Trumpist forces. This will likely cause Trump to align himself closer to Putin in order to crush these rebellions much faster. At this point, many blue states would kick Trumpist forces out of their state, and any attempts by the federal government to retake these states would ultimately fail, which will eventually lead to the federal government giving up de facto control over these seceded states for at least the next decade, and or until a less radical president comes into power. These now technically independent states would be treated similarly to how the West treats Taiwan. The West would treat these new seceded states as independent nations in all but name, still officially recognizing them as a part of the United States. Speaking of which, now that the majority Democratic states have left the country, the United States will become overwhelmingly majority Republican, meaning that Donald Trump could finally pass whatever law he wanted without it being blocked by opposition forces in Congress. Speaking of opposition, the Democratic Party will still exist, but it will have to heavily reform now that its core members have fled to the seceded states. The Democrats in this time will likely become diet Republicans, with the sole purpose of this new Democratic Party to make the United States look like it's a democracy on the world stage. But a majority of US elections would be rigged by the Republicans. The United States in this alternate timeline will function similarly to Hungary or Russia, meaning that the US would allow opposition parties to exist in the United States, but the Republicans would win the election every single time. Speaking of Russia, now that the United States is no longer protecting Ukraine and the rest of Europe, Russia would likely win the war in Ukraine a few months after the Second American Civil War. If that's the case, Russia would likely annex all Ukrainian territories east of the Dnieper River, which means that the remainder of Ukraine is now a Russian puppet state. Something similar would happen to Moldova and Georgia, where Georgia would be forced to recognize Abkhazia and South Ossetia, with the remainders of Georgia and Moldova becoming Russian puppets. This will likely cause both NATO and the EU to merge into one single alliance now that the United States is no longer a part of the NATO alliance. This will also lead to the blue states that have seceded from the United States becoming major non-NATO allies, but not full-on NATO members in order to not piss off Donald Trump. Now, China on the other hand is much more cautious compared to Russia. Many in the Chinese high command would consider invading Taiwan now that the United States is no longer there to oppose the Chinese due to Hawaii being independent and Alaska being annexed by Canada. But seeing how anti-Beijing the Taiwanese people are, they would likely resort to scorched earth tactics if the Chinese were to invade. And the fact that Taiwan is extremely mountainous, so conquering the island would be a difficult challenge. So instead, Xi Jinping would install pro-CCP leaders in Taiwan, but not by force, only through rigged, free and fair elections in Taiwan, similar to how they installed pro-CCP leaders in Hong Kong. The Chinese would likely starve the Taiwanese economy by blockading the island from the rest of the world until the Taiwanese became economically reliant on China. So around a few years later, after the American Civil War ended, Taiwan will become a puppet state to the Chinese. The impact of the Second American Civil War will cause the Americans to withdraw out of Iran, which would be an insane morale boost for the Iranians. Israel would try to instigate a war between the United States and Iran, but the United States is no longer powerful enough to get into meaningless wars with weaker countries. Due to the political climate of the United States, many average citizens from the loyalist states would try to leave to the blue states due to Trump's authoritarianism, while many rich people from the blue states would try to leave to the loyalist states due to the loyalist states' much lower and stable taxes. The blue states would function similarly to the Scandinavian countries, being high tax, high quality of living welfare states. And then eventually, a decade or two later, after the whole American Civil War thing has ended, the United States would finally and officially recognize the blue states as independent countries, having these blue states finally gain seats in the United Nations. And that's where I'm going to end this the scenario for today. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to this channel as well as my main channel, which will be linked in the comments and description down below. Also go follow me on my TikTok, which will also be linked in the comments and description down below. This has been Awesome History, and adios amigos.